Hi there, welcome to my first video for YouTube. So what I'm going to do today is I've got these tiny DFN-10 pin chips, which are actually a charge controller for 2 lithium cells. Now they're quite small, so we're going to see how we get on today soldering it onto this converter that converts it to a dip package so that we can use it for prototyping. So here's the package itself. It's actually 4mm in size. You can see the pins on the back there. So we're going to solder onto this converter board here. So the chip itself will go on there, and then with the converter kit comes a set of pins and a board which is a spacer, which we'll see how we use that in a minute. So if I put that chip to the side for now. So on the reverse of this board we need to solder these pins like so. And we'll use the spacer to sort of align those while we're soldering it. So the plan is to solder this on the back, just using a standard soldering iron, and then when that's all nicely soldered on, we'll remove the spacer board, flip it over, and then use a hot air gun and some solder on the other side to place the DFN chip. So let's get started. First thing we'll do, put some solder paste. Sorry, not solder paste. I'm getting ahead of myself. A little bit of flux. The flux I'm using here comes in a little syringe with a tiny nozzle. Allows you to be quite precise where you put it, because we don't want too much, because we need to wash away any residue at the end. So if we place the pins on, align them, and there we go. So the idea is to use this board just to align the pins. So what we'll do is we'll tack along the edges, and then we can remove the centre alignment board, and then we can solder on the inside. So I'm just using a standard bevel tip soldering iron and some 0.3mm lead-free solder. So first thing to do is wipe off any solder off the tip of the soldering iron, and then re-wet the soldering iron with a bit more solder, and then wipe it off again. So let's start to solder these. moved very slightly, so we'll just put it back. I'm not quite happy with that, let's just move it a little bit further. Okay, so that's one side roughly positioned. Let's solder this one here. Okay, so we've tacked one side, so let's turn it around. Can you see that there? And then if it's light here, maybe that's a bit better. Oh, that did move, so let's just put that back. Do actually normally use a smoke extractor, but for the purposes of me talking while I'm videoing, I've turned it off. It's really good actually for taking all the smoke away. So I'm just soldering all these down one by one. Don't need too much solder, just enough to make a fillet all around the pins. Let's just turn that back around again and then finish this last pin here. Okay, I'm running my soldering iron quite hot at 350 degrees. Just find it's easier to, when there's nothing that's going to be damaged by high temperature, it just makes it quicker to do soldering. Okay, so now we've taken away the holder. So I don't know if you can see that, but now there's a set of inside pins that we need to solder down. So let's go ahead and do that. That's all I'm doing, a little bit of solder on the soldering iron, touching it to heat both the pin and the pad, and then touching a bit of solder when both are hot enough, and you can see the solder flows around the pin and nicely wets the pad and the pin. And if you look closely, you'll see that the solder actually goes underneath the pin to make a nice contact. Now your joints want to be nice and shiny, so if they're not shiny, that can lead to bad conductivity on the joint, normally caused by a lack of flux. So if that happens, I'm going to take the solder away and resolder the joint. Okay, so there we go. So what we've done at the moment is, let's move that right. So we've got the space on the top of the board for the DFN chip with the pins on the reverse, and what this is going to be used for is for building prototypes, breadboarded prototypes using that DFN chip. Okay, so what we'll do next is clean off that flux. What I use for that is some isopropyl alcohol and a little piece of kitchen roll, sometimes with a brush. So what you can do So all I'm doing is taking some isopropyl alcohol, just wetting a piece of kitchen roll, and then wiping off the board. On more delicate boards, I find a paintbrush is quite good, but if you trim the bristles down short, then you've got a lot more pressure and you can really get into all little gaps to make sure that all flux has gone. Because actually, if you don't remove the flux, it can corrode the board over time. So it's always a good idea to clean the flux away. I'm actually using no clean flux here, but just habit really is to take away the flux. Just gives the board a much nicer finish if it's nice and clean. Okay, so it's always a good idea just to inspect the board. So the next thing we're going to do is solder the DFN chip on. So to do that, we're going to use a hot air gun with a preheater. You don't have to use a preheater, but I find that it generally makes it a lot easier to get the components hot enough without damaging nearby components. So preheater, all that does is warms the whole board up to a temperature that's less than the melting point of the solder. So then all you're doing is heating up the specific component that you're trying to solder on with the hot air gun. So you're not having to wait a long time to heat up that particular part because it's already very close to the right temperature. Right, so this is the preheater. It just has a heated elements at the bottom with some brackets to hold the board. So we've got a very small board, so let's pop it in. Now we will have to be careful because of course we've soldered the pins onto the reverse of the board, so we're going to have to be careful we don't heat it up too much. Okay, so that's firmly in place. So let's just zoom in on that. Okay, so there we go. So we'll turn on the preheater to 200 degrees, and then just checking that that's starting to warm up. So what we're going to do is use solder paste, put it on the pads on the DFN chip, and then heat the chip with a hot air gun to melt the solder paste and solder it in place. Now the hot air gun has a fairly small nozzle, so we'll set the hot air gun probably on about 300 degrees, enough to melt the solder paste. So again, a little nozzle, It's quite hard to put the right amount of solder paste on, and in fact we're going to need a tiny amount here, so we'll probably end up putting on a bit too much, but we'll try to put on a small amount. Okay, so there it's coming out the end. This has actually got a heat dissipating pad right in the middle there, and you can see actually that there's a hole or a via right in the middle there. The reason for that is so that any excess solder can, through capillary action, be drawn away through the via, so that the chip sits firmly down onto the board, makes good contact. Because if you ever design a board yourself, you must always put the via hole in the middle. Because it's an isolated pad, there's nowhere for any excess solder to flow to. So now that's getting warm, you can see the solder paste has started to melt, which is a good sign. So what we'll do, go ahead and place the chip on the board, taking care to note the dot lines up with the dot on the chip. Now we'll place that down there. Okay, so you can see the dot on the chip is this on this corner here, and there's a little white dot on the board. Okay, so that's heated up to 200, so I know that even if this board heats at 200 degrees, those pins are not going to come off. So turn on my hot air gun. Wait for that to get up to temperature. Set it to about 300 degrees. And then we want to make sure that we warm chip, and we're watching the solder to melt. There we go, the solder's melted and it's pulled itself down onto the board. Now, noticing there is a little bit of excess on this side, so we're going to have to try that one again. Okay, so let's take the board out. Let's just have a closer look at that. Yeah, so there's definitely too much solder on that. Okay, probably the easiest thing is to take it off and try again. So taking it off is just as easy as putting it on. So you just want to heat it up until it moves, and then just pick it up. Okay, there we go. So if we just look underneath here just to check where we are. Now it's nice and shiny, there isn't an excess of solder on there, so probably what we can do is just wick away any of the excess solder on the board, and then just use the solder that's already there with a little bit of flux. Okay, so here's some solder wick. It's just a braided copper strand that comes on a reel. So you want to use some flux on there. So this is still preheated, so it's going to be fairly easy to remove. So put a bit of flux on there. Then using a soldering iron, just wait for that to get up to temperature. So I'm just making sure that my soldering iron is nice and wet. Wipe that off, then touch the solder wick on there and then just wipe it away, and that will soak up the excess. So now you can see it's nicely tinned, but there isn't an excess. In fact, let's just wipe it away to spread out any solder that's there. Okay, so it's not too much. There's the tiniest amount of solder still on the chip, so we're probably good to go at trying to solder it back on. So let's put some more flux on there. Take the chip I've got here, being careful to line up the dots. Let's place it back on there. The alignment is not super critical because the surface tension will pull it square, but of course you have to make sure that the pins are lined up with the correct pins. You're having a bit of difficulty here. Okay, there we go. So let's have another go. Just wait for the hot air to heat up. Okay, so again running at 300 degrees. So we'll see when it reaches temperature, it'll cool down. There we go. Let's just check. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so that was that. Now, if we take the board off again, so remember the whole time here this has been preheated, which is why it was fairly easy to melt the solder with the hot air gun. Okay, so I'm just taking a look at it. So let's have a look. You can see we've got some nice beads of solder, nice fillets in the corner. Yeah, so there's not too much. I can't see any bridges across any of the pins. And there we go. So the last thing to do, let's just move this out of the way, turn off the preheater. Let's not forget to clean off the soldering iron. Put a nice amount of solder on there, and then put that away for next time. Okay, so the last job is to clean off the flux. So let's just remount this back in the vise so you can get a good look at it. There we go. Move that light there so you maybe get a better look. So you can still see the flux residue in the corner down here. So if I clean that away, then you will see it's completed. We'll just take that out. Again, just a nice amount of alcohol on a cloth. Just wipe all that residue away. Now I was going to show you my paintbrush to get rid of this solder, but to get rid of the paste, but I can't find it, so I can't show you that, I'm afraid. So we'll just have to use a piece of tissue, which is not a problem. Tiny DFN-10 chip soldered on. There we go.